you. Remaining resilient. So at the time that you saw a direct and growing immediate impact on your team, as COVID was hitting, as we were all sort of being held, we had to stay home. What were the first 2 steps you took to stay nimble and respond?
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. And I'm happy to be here, everyone. So all of you are involved in tech, and when you're in tech, things are like constantly changing, right? And so when this hit, I remember the day, it was a defining moment. I was on a ski trip in Vermont, and basically we got the notice that the office was closing and that we wouldn't be able to go back. And the organization that I lead, as Kristen was saying, what we do is we do software training for pharmaceutical companies. So we train sales reps in using client relationship management software. And so anytime we sell that software, my organization goes out and we have to train the people that are actually going to use our software. And pharma has always been very kind of slow to change. So, a pharmaceutical rep, when they go out, they want to meet face-to-face with doctors, right? And so we really haven't gotten a lot of traction in the past with anything other than face-to-face training. So, I think our first thing was, either we were gonna change or we were gonna just like die. It was like do or die, right? So, the first thing we did was our facilitators who are good, but they're very used to face-to-face training. So I got somebody who I knew in the industry who does a lot of virtual training, brought him in, and we spent like a couple of days just training our facilitators on how to engage differently over virtual kinds of methodologies. And then the second part was, the curriculum that we had, our courses were like, they're very technical. So somebody could come, if they were doing implementation of our software, they could come and do a whole week of training, face-to-face training, back to back. So we had to start thinking about, how do we redesign the courses so that they would become more engaging, we wouldn't lose people, what media would we use? And so, those are really, I think, our first 2 steps is just stop, train our facilitators, change our materials, and then the rest was sort of secondary, but that kind of kept us running.
Awesome. Man, what a run. Joel, what about you? And we talked, you can take it from the stance of your business or your clients' businesses, really.
No, thank you. First of all, thank you, Kristen and Liz, for having me. The boxer Mike Tyson has a great quote. He says, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And I think, COVID came and it really, really changed people. And I think, the interesting thing is I just came back from Steamboat Springs with a bunch of clients. In fact, we were there yesterday, day before. And when I think of COVID, I think of a tale of 2 cities or a tale of 2 realities, because, I think obviously if you're in the media, of course, there's just a lot of hardship and a lot of change, but really in my time away, and we do these immersions where we talk about mindset and we talk about, how to drive different outcomes in the middle of really stressful situations. On one side of the room, you've got people that are like, I'm about to have the best year of my life. I love the fact that I'm working from home, and like, half of the participants in the immersion were like, this is phenomenal because this is creating some really new dimensions for me. The other half, completely different opposite, stressed out, not really knowing how to react. And so I know we're going to go into different facets of these questions, but I will say, for me personally, to partner with executives, there are 2 things that I did immediately, and it wasn't anything different. There was things I'd been doing in my own business practice. But the first thing I did was I had to really take a step back and look at the larger narrative. And for me, being a person of faith, I prayed 4 words, which is thy will be done. As soon as this happened, I had to step back and go, there's a larger narrative going on and I've got to not control it. And I got to really let go of control because when we control things, we're in our limbic brain and we have bad outcomes. But then the second thing I had to remind myself was I have a handful of mantras, and one of them is I am in a network of relationships that are generous and resourceful. And ideas like that, I began to build on those ideas. And so I know we're going to talk about some of the strategies, but for me, it was just leaning on strategies that were in place to help me and my clients. get grounded in what their core values and beliefs were, and not so much getting too paranoid or reactive to what was happening in the media and even internally with some of the dialogue.
Great, thank you. I love that you mentioned the media, and then it's relentless. Danya, what were your first 2 steps you took once you realized that COVID was having an immediate and direct impact on your business?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you seriously for letting me be a part of this, and then also setting me up to follow Joel, because it's like he says these things and I'm like, yeah, we got this, we can do this. So anyway, I can see that his business is doing well. But I operate in the public health and construction field. So ultimately, we were considered an essential business. So we were able to still operate, but the biggest issue was it didn't have to do with us. It had to do with what our clients wanted. And it took us, we had to pivot and we had to listen. We realized that while our clients were essential businesses as well, compliance training fell second to survival. We focused on 2 messages. We had to come up with an internal message and an external message. So I'm CEO, I'm leader of the helm. Our external message was about consistency in an inconsistent world. So no matter what you needed, we would be there. We would change our courses, we would change our schedule, we would make sure we were clean, sanitized, whatever our customers needed, we would be there. And I have to note how different this was in our situation, because literally all of my competitors closed their doors, not forever, but for at least a month. And I looked at that, like, I understand public health. I understand that you want to keep your team safe. But at this time, we needed to be there. We needed to say, we can do this and we can do this safely. Our internal message, so I have a small team, and our internal message was, we looked at everybody and we were like, we're going to do this. We're going to take whatever capabilities we have, and we're going to make this work. Luckily, we were already set up to be digital because we focus on innovation. We focus on making sure that we can kind of work and play how we need. But we were going to do what it needed what it was going to take to be able to survive. And that commitment and that open communication, I think, really helped.
Excellent. Awesome. And I appreciate you guys are keeping this so brief. This is great, so we can get to Q&A. I know we've got a lot going on in the chat, so we're just going to go ahead and go through that during Q&A. And since our panelists are being so succinct and awesome, I think that we're going to have a chance to really go through that Q&A or through the chat box. So keep the questions going. We'll get to them, okay? Okay, so my second question, we'll start with Christine. And this one is, so this one is sort of like, you went through the first trauma, the shock, you made these first steps, you saw the changes, and now just let us know, what were 2 measurable outcomes that you pulled from, from those first nimble steps you took, and were they positive or were they negative, or what does that look like now?
Yeah, okay. Well, a couple of things. I was talking earlier about my own organization, but also the bigger picture that was happening at the same time was that my company, we actually sell software that allows people to, it's kind of like a Zoom software, but it's got all its compliance features built in, and it's specifically for the healthcare industry, so that sales reps can have confidential and compliant conversations with doctors. So, and the reason that I wanted to mention that too is because there are kind of outcomes on a couple of different levels. So on my level, actually, it was really interesting because, we thought that things would kind of slow down and the pharma companies would be really slow to adopt. And in fact, it kind of like pushed them ahead to probably where they needed to be going anyhow. And so we were actually busier than ever. And we had no slowdown at all. In fact, I think we had probably more course enrollments than we had in the past. And why? Because, you know, people didn't have to travel now. So, you know, in the past, you might have sent like 5 people to class and then they'd come back and train the other people. Now, you know, there was a lot easier for people to enroll in class. And so we're actually seeing an uptick on the amount of training that we're doing. On the other hand, too, we had positioned this software in the market 6 months for free, just to kind of help our customers, you know, over the hump. And an outcome from that, I actually just heard that this week, is that we've gotten a lot of takers where we're now are actually starting to see some of that change happening in the pharma industry, where they're starting to leverage a lot more offline conversations instead of having all of that face-to-face. And we have now like actually built that software into our CRM platform and are starting to see a lot of, you know, uptake on that as well. So I thought those were 2 really interesting developments that, like, you know, we could, had we wanted to do that 6 months ago, we could have never made it happen. And now the uptake is so good. We're actually seeing higher sales, both in training and in our software organization. So those were a couple of really big things for us.
Okay, Joel, you're up next. What were some measurable outcomes that you're seeing after all the wake of it, and both positive and negative?
Well, you know, I think if we go back to one of the core ideas of our discussion is about resilience. And I think, you know, there's a lot of different ways to define resilience, but I think one of them is just being able to quickly bounce back from difficulty. You know, how do you quickly manage stress? You know, how do you get out of your limbic brain, and how do you stop, you know, the fear-based and the uncertainty and the doubt? And, you know, how do you get people to think about the preferable outcome? And again, I really admire the 2 women that are on this panel are phenomenal. You know, my work is much more personal. It's more executive one-on-one. And we just talk about more about the quality of how people communicate ideas to their top team. And so it's really about the quality of the connection that they are having to their people, in this case, executives. And, you know, I've had leaders that read a book a week. And the interesting thing is, what I've found is a lot of leaders in the morning to conquer certain issues in their companies. And what I mean by that is, one of the things that I, you know, help them do is create these morning mantras of conquest in their mindset, you know, where they're going to actually create a narrative. And they're going to create a picture. You know, a lot of what we know about the brain is, you know, the brain is an organ that has to execute on a set of ideas. If you put the right ideas in your mind, the brain will find a way to execute. And that's why there's that whole distinction between, you know, the cynic always finds a problem and the optimist always finds a party, right? And so my work, again, which is much more highly specialized, is just more centered on helping executives clearly create pictures in their mind, really, of preferable outcomes. And so a lot of the work that I do with people is centered on that space. And then, you know, we go back and we develop metrics to measure, you know, how did that preferable picture actually turn out in terms of in an actual conversation, but then more importantly, at the end of a week or a month, in a targeted outcome. So again, my work is very pointed toward the idea that the mind gets rewired, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And the ideas that we intentionally put in our minds will be executed, and therefore we create intentional pictures of positive outcomes.
Awesome. And Danya, I'll give you the option if you want to jump in with the outcome, or if you want to take it. So Danya is in more of the startup space. So we had talked earlier and thought, well, maybe her overall business planning going forward might actually change, like really change. So you can, up to you.
Yeah, so I feel like, again, I'm going to throw this back to Joel. Like, we prepped earlier and everything he said ties into what I'm saying, but my story is 100% that whole tale of 2 cities, but within one company. So we had already been forward thinking, and we were like, hey, there's this antiquated industry, we're going to take it to the digital age. But we thought that was going to be like a slow, you know, like on The Price is Right, the miner going up the hill. We thought it was going to be that slow trek. And then, COVID happened, and in March and April, sales of our online or our live classes dropped 60%, but our online classes jumped 413%. So we're sitting here being like, okay, forget all the training you guys have learned. Now we need to shift, and we need to make sure that this experience, because our students train with us like once a year and then they come back to renew their certificates. So this experience has to be the best experience that we possibly can give them to hope that they come back next year, that they don't just say, oh, that was my first taste of technology, I don't want to do this, or I don't like learning online. It was a crazy shift. And then I think that you kind of touched on it, how does this affect our business planning? There's an interesting thing with this. So we hope that situations like this show our industry that online renewal is a viable option for meeting the needs of both, the stakeholders in the students as well as the regulators, because we do highly regulated training. But the hairy side of this is not all online classes are created equal, and we kind of enjoyed a slight luxury that we didn't know until now, because we were the first to the market. The waves in the blue ocean were basically created by us. And once they said, hey, everybody needs online training, we don't have access to these solutions, we had a flood of competitors. So now we've got some more boats to watch and navigate. And I'm just going to talk openly about it. The immediate need for these online distance learning options basically force less innovative training providers to come in and create what I call Band-Aid courses. They solve the immediate need of accessibility, but not all of the other layers, like what's better for the stakeholders, what's the student success rate, all of those different things that we focus so heavily on. So it's just something that we now have to look at. Like, our competitive landscape makes a bigger difference than we had initially thought. We were like, we're going to make it to the top, not have very many competitors, and it's a different story now.
Wow. Did you foresee that?
Not before COVID. So we didn't think that the regulators, so we're bound by regulations, like we can only train what they give us approval to train, and then we can innovate within that space. We thought that the regulators were going to hold steady and be like, all right, we're going to look for training providers that already have online programs. They basically were like, oh, we have existing training providers, everybody do Zoom meetings. And I understand it completely, but it's a different model, and we have to look at that now, because we were offering completely asynchronous classes, so.
All right. Thank you, Danya. That's so fascinating. It's so fascinating. Okay, our third question, we're just zipping right along because then we've got to get over to the chat. And I think this one hits home for everyone. So, Christine, in your opinion, what are the two most common or to be expected emotional barriers that present themselves when a crisis arises for business owners?
Yeah, so, I mean, for me, like the very first one is fear, right? And, you kind of stop, and fear can be paralyzing. And, when you look at the leadership level, you really want your leaders to be able to take action, but it's happening at every level across the organization. And so, I feel like as a leader, a lot of times we're out there solving the problems first, but then, we're not always taking a good look at what's happening down, across all levels in the organization. And so, for me, I was like moving forward quickly, and then it helps you get past the fear, but then at the same time, kind of stopping and saying like, wait, where's everybody else at this moment in time? And how do I bring them along? And how do I get them, excited about where we're going? Because what ended up happening was, we had a vision to go in this direction. We knew we needed to do it anyhow, but then we were able to bring people along. I mean, as we're a big corporation, right? And so we had a ton of support, all kinds of communications coming from our human resources group and all of this corporate stuff. But at the end of the day, what I found is, as a manager, you just needed to have a lot more communication, because there was like some people that, which person was at home, their family had lost their jobs, and even though they had a job, maybe somebody else didn't. And so, we had a lot of situations where somebody would be like, I'm really afraid about what's going to happen. My mother's sick, and I'm afraid she's going to get COVID. So there's like all that personal stuff that was going on at the same time as all the business stuff was going on. And it was just like making yourself accessible and having those conversations. And I think I said that earlier too. I mean, we've been virtual in tech for a long time, but we weren't using our videos and really trying to make that connection. So for us now, you're seeing like everybody's putting their videos on, everybody's creating time, even just like team building, creating like, an hour once a week where it's just kind of open mic and people, do professional development or sharing or anything. It's funny because you get people's kids in the background, you get people's dogs, and it's changed the environment, I think, for really in a good way. So it's been kind of a mixed, a mixed blessing, I guess, but yeah.
Joel?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Christine. I think fear is often connected to uncertainty or ambiguity, and I find, even side note, with people that are in conflict, a lot of times conflict is tied into ambiguity. People need to have certainty in the middle of something that seems to be uncertain. One of the great tools, and I want to encourage everybody to try this. Because I just think it's fun, and you've got to set it up the right way. But when there is fear and there's uncertainty, and this is now, I'm using this tool in the context of me being one-on-one with a leader of the company. It's the idea, it's called 7 Whys. And you go into the conversation, obviously there's some kind of a conflict, there's some kind of a challenge, it's, there's an obstacle, there's fear, there's uncertainty. But you tell the person, hey, I want to ask you, I'm going to be repetitive, so I'm not trying to insult your intelligence, but stay with me. I'm going to ask you a question. And then, the first question is, why do you feel this way? And then he'll give you, or she will give you a response. And then you'll say, well, why? And what's interesting is when you go 7 levels down, you begin to find core issues. Normally on the surface, when people are struggling with something, it is on the surface. But it's not until you peel the layers down do you help people understand some of these core ideas. And when the light bulb comes on, it's really exciting, because I think people then can take more comfort that they are not just self-aware, but they're understanding the core issue of the problem. And alongside of that, we all know that thoughts become speech, become action. And I think we've got to be careful. Fear is very real, but I think we've got to be comfortable talking to people about fear. This is an interesting situation that happened in Colorado, in Steamboat Springs 2 days ago. There was a husband and wife team, and one of the comments was, the husband's guided by wisdom, and he made a comment about his wife's emotions. And I said, I don't want to misjudge your motives or your intention, but it almost sounded like, your wife is just emotional, and it didn't sound right to me, And we had a fantastic conversation, because from that conversation came out the idea that, behind emotions are thoughts, and, we need to be respectful of what people think, because the thoughts are driving the emotions, and it just takes patience. We've got to be patient with people and not be afraid to spend some extra time getting to their thought life about what they really think about things. And of course, everything moves so quickly, and we think, we don't have time for these questions. I'm not a psychologist. This is not therapy. It's not. And you're not a therapist, and you're not a psychologist, but you can ask great questions and really care about people and peel the onion back. And so I agree with Christine. I think fear, can be the enemy, but I think we've got to have courage to ask a lot of questions and root out issues, so that we can help people see what they're afraid of, and that way we can develop a strategy to move it forward.
Danya?
Yeah, I touched base on, I felt the 2 emotional barriers that I personally felt was fear and anxiety. Business owners bleed the color of their business. I mean, I live and breathe everything about my business. I created it with such a vision, and I've been it's become everything that I do, in a good way. healthy. But when this threat accompanied by this intense loss of control, I mean, I never in a million years thought that the government could tell us that we can't operate, that we can't leave our homes, that we have curfews. I mean, I just never thought that, you know, you don't plan for that. I had this intense fear that I would lose the business. On that first day after the governor issued the stay-at-home order, we had 84 student cancellations. I was paying out more money than I was getting for weeks. And I would have this notepad that would just say, okay, refunds, you know, and I would just go through, okay, which one am I going to tackle today? And it happened like that for weeks. And I was sitting there being like, everything that I put into this is gone. I feared for my employees. I sat there and I was like, how can I keep them busy? How can I guarantee that they're going to have a livelihood here? How are they going to pay their bills? You know what, I know this wasn't part of the question, but I hate talking about vulnerabilities, and I hate talking about emotional barriers and not giving a solution. And I think that's just part of my nature, always kind of looking at the good side of things. What got me through it was, one, I was vulnerable. I said I was scared. I teared up in front of people. I told them that I didn't have the answers, but I also let them know that I saw opportunity. And if there was going to be any of a moment for us to rise to the top, coming in saying, we know technology and we've invested in this and we're going to get us through this, it was going to be now. The other thing that got me through it, I heard it on Peloton. I know that is so showing my age, and that's not like, but one of them, if you ever have done Peloton rides, they are very inspirational, and sometimes they give you what you need to hear. But I basically heard one of the instructors say, if you're not sure of your strength, be sure of your will. And if there's anything that I am sure of, it is the will. It is the desire to change this industry. It is the desire to be there for people. And I may not be sure of my strength. I may not be sure that I can get through a lot of what we're going through, but I'm certainly sure of the direction.
Wow, awesome. Awesome. What an awesome panel. This has been, I'm so inspired. I'm motivated. I feel like I learned so much. And there's so much more here that we can keep talking about. We've got a whole Q&A, and I'm so excited right now. So, okay, let's jump into Q&A. That'll just kind of keep us going. And we'll just kind of keep with the same cadence with Christine, Joel, and Danya, if you guys, but this is going to be more of a pop in, pop out kind of a thing. And guys, don't be shy if you want to just ask a question.
All right, well, let me ask the questions that came up on the chat, and then we'll go from there. So there was a question around how did you change materials to adapt? Right, so let's see. From Christine, right? How did you change up your materials to adapt? We want to run a 2.5-day intensive events that are great for Q&A, whiteboard tech. We are doing shorter events, but not the same. So for those that have marketing materials, how did you change your materials, your emails, your website, and things like that to adapt? Is that a fair representation of that, Christine?
Oh, no, I saw the question in the box, but I was kind of responding to the question on how we changed our materials to adapt. I mean, the other thing that, we're in a big company, so we had the luxury also of being able to leverage some really good technology, which we've done. Actually, we did a virtual sales conference today that was fabulous. It was like going into a real conference, and complete with, photo booths and all of that stuff, which isn't accessible to everyone, but just even on the, like, how do you redesign it? It's thinking about, like, do you have a good solid technology? And I forget who's, Danya was saying it earlier, when she got a lot of competitors that are kind of coming in, a lot of people think it's just like,
Oops. Okay.
Making it more effective over virtual, but by the same token, you have to chunk it differently.
All right. We're having some challenges here with Christine. So I'm going to kind of redirect some questions from Aubrey. Aubrey had 2 questions.
Liz, if I can touch on that a little bit, because we've kind of been prepping for COVID, I bet, before COVID even happened, but you know, we take materials that were never meant to be in an online format and put them online, and then make it so that individuals who have never taken online classes succeed and feel engagement. So the number one thing that I always tell people to do, because I do like topic discussions through like the AGC and stuff like that, is look at your end user or your learner. A lot of times when people are looking at how to shift for digital, they look at what they've done in the past and how to make that digital. And you're starting from a different perspective. Now you want to flip it, okay? How is the learner, the individual, going to be using the material, receiving the material, or what are they looking to get out of it? Start from there, and then you can start to figure out what technology is available and how you're going to shift it. So it may look completely different than putting someone in front of a screen, because think about it, putting someone in front of the screen is what you would do in a classroom. You know, you would put someone in front of the room, but that may not meet the needs of the individuals that are in that room. It might be that they need a one-on-one conversation. It might mean that they need some videos to watch, or maybe some games. Like gamification is huge. And believe it or not, I have this theory that everybody likes to play, whether the age, no matter their age. So figure out a way that they can interact with the material that they've interacted with before, but in a complete different way. And then secondly, don't forget to ask, because I do not know every single app that's available. I do not have the ability to go through and figure out what technology is the leader of the day. So find people that are excelling in those spaces and ask the question, and believe it or not, you'll start to find little tidbits here and there that work for your situation.
So there was a clarification on that. Do you have a couple of specific examples of the transition from in-person to virtual that were successful?
Yeah, so we did a lot of, so like in a normal classroom, like your teacher may ask you questions, right? Like, okay, where is lead-based paint present? Not in your classes likely, but in mine. And what we found is that that's not, like, having a discussion isn't going to be feasible in our space. We want to make it to that where our students can take it anywhere in the world at any time. So we had hover-overs, you know, and we would have pictures of 1985 homes, and it would hover over and it would give them the answer. And like, we do respirators and PPE. And so we have them dragging and dropping the PPE on the individual while it tells them what they can, now what hazards they are better prepared for. So end result would be, what does the learner need to walk out with? What does the individual need to walk out with? And then finding modules that have the exact relation to that. How is it going to teach them that exact thing? So if you're trying to say, I need sales agents to understand how to better engage with people in a digital market, then your modules need to 100% capture that. Whereas I think we approach it like, okay, we've had, I shouldn't ever talk about anybody else's industries because I never know. I should always just stick in my own. But nevertheless, we've always had these meetings, and then we try to replicate these meetings in a digital space, and we're wondering why it's disconnected. What you need to look at is the outcomes, and then build solutions around the outcomes, because they do exist. There's products that exist that are better for that. You may need to have more polls. You may need to have discussions. So what we're doing, we found on a national scale, asbestos changes by state. And so what we're doing is we're allowing discussions where people can pin topics, which we wouldn't have done that before. We took a federal standard and put it on there and had them learn that. And now we're saying, hey, you know what? We're finding that people want to teach each other. Let's try and open this conversation up beyond state lines.
Gotcha. Joel or Christine, do you have any other examples that you want to throw in there that are relevant here?
I mean, I would say that a lot of what we've done has actually been successful, and partly because you know, a lot of times when you put people in a classroom, you're kind of teaching, you're trying to find that even ground, right? You're either teaching to the lowest common denominator, or if you're teaching at a level where not everybody's at that level, you're trying to, you know, bring people along. And what the virtual training can do is it can allow you to have a little bit more personalization. And so some of what we've done is we've broken pieces out so it becomes more blended. So we'll do a teach, and then we'll get hands-on, in our case it's software, right? So it might be, okay, go into the sandbox and try these different exercises. So people go out and they'll try them on their own, and it gives everybody a little bit, you know, personal time to play with the software. And some people might be faster and some people might be slower. And so then they all come back and then we regroup. How did that go? Did you have any challenges? So to me that, you know, in some ways can, if you do it right, it could actually be more effective than doing it in a classroom setting. So absolutely. The other thing I really like is the virtual breakouts, and you can achieve a lot of good discussions by putting people into small breakouts, because I think, you know, some of the, in the same way that the classroom, not everyone wants to speak up, you're always balancing the introverts with the extroverts. It again gives you a chance to put people in smaller groups, let them talk about issues, and then they regroup into the bigger group, and that can be really effective as well.
Joel, have you adjusted any of your strategies because of COVID in terms of helping your clients?
You know, I don't think it's necessarily been an adjustment. I think it's just been more of an emphasis on this morning ritual of really creating these ideas and practices that are forming their ideal outcomes. And I think, as I said earlier, you know, executives are reading a book a week, and I think they have a lot of information. And I think they talk about strategies and tactics, but I think it's just really more of an emphasis on putting your game face on, but really thinking about specifically what are the ideas that are going to drive these favorable outcomes. And so, you know, again, my work is obviously different, but hopefully complementary to the next conversation. You know, I'm leaning more on the idea of, for instance, Olympians using visualization. You know, self-improvement people use the law of attraction. But I think what I've really leaned on is much more of, again, if the game tonight we're talking about is resiliency. And the idea is to be resilient is to be able to quickly bounce back from things that are creating whether it's stress or negativity or unwanted outcomes. And so, you know, if my job is to get clients to get really clear on, in the morning, what are your core beliefs? What are your values? And I work a lot with I am statements. You know, there's a body of research that has actually proven that there is something unusual and powerful about the words that follow I am. And so I have a lot of my executives come up with 10, 15, 20 I am statements about them as people, as catalysts, as leaders, and as people that change and improve, you know, the environment that they work in. And so again, I'm all about understanding what is getting in the way of people having fantastic outcomes, and how do we create ideas that the brain can execute on so that executives can really love messaging out in a time where a lot of people are, you know, fearful and uncertain.
Mm-hmm. So the one question I had for Joel, you made a very, is this okay that I ask a direct question?
Oh, go right ahead.
Yeah. You made an interesting statement, which was, sorry, I'm copying some of your words down, which was, how do you measure the quality of connections? And that right now, and what I'm looking at, okay, so we're 6 months in. 6 months in, okay, we're fine. We figured out whatever that new normal is. And from an executive statement or building a business statement, you know, the executives have your relationship. How would you, and nobody's got the answers to this, I know this, because we're new normal. God, I'm like doing all the marketing messages. I'm really sorry guys. How are you finding ways to create or have your clients create connections? And that goes for both Christine's commentary, which you've got salespeople, totally different than an executive. You know, one of the beauties of that's going on right now is that, you know, my clients, which are, you know, kind of big tech companies, every CEO is on a zillion Zooms, and they're quote unquote connecting with all the CIOs out there.
Right.
Is it really connection, or what is it? And I think it's wearing itself out.
Right.
On the other hand, you've got salespeople that are having to connect. So it's a bigger, kind of, it's a big connection about how do you create a real connection that now what we're into, we're in 6 months, we're about to go to 9 months, we're going to be in 12 months by March.
Right.
Is business development that is no longer based upon the people we knew. And that's what I am curious about what the long tail is, about where we're going to be. Because after, my belief is after December, that we've worn out our core contacts from a business development standpoint. And how do you continue that where you don't have the original connection?
Yeah.
And can we? And maybe we can. I mean, just like, I'm old school. Sorry. I've got gray hair. Colored. It's just colored big time.
Yes, I do too. It's Camberley, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. You know, I don't have a crystal ball about how this plays out, but I remember a senior ranking officer. I was a naval officer, and there were some real galvanizing moments in the military for me. And one of them was a conversation where a senior leader said to me, you know, Joel, be careful not to put performance over the relationships with your unit. And here's a guy that was so bent on results, right? Here's a machine that absolutely has to succeed, and really historically was almost dehumanizing people for the sake of achieving a mission. And it caught me off guard. I didn't know what to at first, you know, think about it, but I learned quickly that, you know, there were two leaders in the military. One was, they were just bent on winning and bent on results, and they rode over people, and they didn't care. But then there were some really unique special leaders. I happened to be under one of them, Lieutenant Commander Doug Mihalik, and I would have went through a burning building for that guy because he cared for me. And I think that's, you know, and I think Danya touched on it earlier, is, you know, I mean, you know, together we're going to get through this. And I think when I go into a client engagement and there is instability and there's uncertainty and maybe there's conflict and they want to figure out a change initiative, you know, the starting point is, you know, can we trust each other? And I don't know if conversations like that are happening a lot, you know.
So Joel, I'm going to challenge you on that, and then I'll shut up and I'll put my mute on. My dad was a U.S. naval officer. Okay.
You were?
No, I wasn't. My dad was.
Oh, awesome.
I've got a blog that I've posted multiple times called Walk the Engine Room. And this is one of the issues I'm really concerned about, is that Dad, when he captained the ship, his core thing was always, he walked the engine room, and he always had, once a week, he had meals in the enlisted officers' mess. And when I asked him why, he said he always wanted to make sure that when he wanted the engines to hit, they always hit. And he had them, and I can tell you gobs of stories about it, but I won't do it here. But the point is that we can't walk the engine rooms. Christine doesn't have her salespeople walking the engine rooms and walking into your customer's place.
Right.
You learn so much by that. Right. And so what I'm trying to do is like, okay, so we can survive for a certain period of time, but there's a certain period of time where that understanding of the engine room and that kind of stuff, we can no longer stand at the captain's stance. You have to go down. You got to go walk it.
Right.
Oh, that's a great blog. I think I'll do that. But anyway, I'm going to shut. Everybody else can go on. Go.
Well, I want to say one thing. We are getting to walk a different sort of engine room. Like, you are sitting in my apartment and there's probably 3 things behind me that you could figure out to talk to me about that you would probably never figure out in a live situation. And for me, I am very, believe it or not, super nervous. Like, I have a hard time going up to people. I don't thrive in situations where it is basically cold calling or going straight up to someone and saying, hey, I'm Danya, let's talk. But I'm willing to give information into a hopes of a future conversation. So I come at it, I'm not going to deny that our world is on edge and we are going to have to figure out a new way of moving forward. Maybe not the new normal, because I feel like it's not a new normal. I feel like it's just now. There's a whole world that's going to be changed, but it's going to still exist. And we're still going to operate the way that we want, or we had operated in the past. But maybe now we'll be a little bit more open with letting people into a personal side of our lives and not just the business.
Well put.
So who wants to talk about my apartment? No, I'm just kidding.
Is that bottle of champagne in the back?
Yeah, see? I won that with Colorado Companies to Watch.
Wow. Yeah, and I'm so excited that everyone's had a chance to really flush some of these topics out. I think that everyone's been really curious and probably just eager to get, to turn off the news and hear from real business owners living in the real world. So we're at 6:55. We usually go way over. I just think we've really covered a lot. Liz, I can see you've been kind of manning the chat room, so.
Yeah, are there other questions that people have? I mean, we do have a little time, so if there are questions you have of our panelists, please chime in. Don't be shy. All right, we have a group of people that are not talking tonight. I did have one question, which is around digital transformation. So one of the things that we have been seeing as we talk to our prospective customers is that many companies are taking 5 to 10-year digital transformation strategies and squishing them right into the next year, 6 months to a year, depending on the size of the organization. And while there's, kind of good and bad with that, that's creating some unique challenges for organizations, for customers, for employees that are having to go through one more round of rapid corporate change. So for the panelists, have you or any of your clients going through this? How are people kind of managing this change management process that is becoming layered and complex due to the adaptation that organizations are making, in addition to the adaptations that people just are having to make in terms of, how they work, whether they still have jobs or not, or things of that nature. So I don't know if any of you have had experience on that, but I'd be curious to hear if you have, or if your clients have and they've expressed kind of what they're doing.
Well, I always look at times of trauma, times of tribulation that we've gone through in the past, and we look at what skills we have. And in my industry, the businesses that I work with, they looked at what skills they had and they're like, hey, we're already cleaning up hazardous materials. It's not a far stretch for us to be able to start offering decontamination services and disinfectant services. And so we started to help them pivot and learn the new, regulations and OSHA standards and stuff to be able to do that safely. But that's what we're seeing. You saw people that were making hand sanitizer because they had the ability to do it. And that is what the strength of our country will be. That is the strength of the economy and business, that we are able to look at what we have and then we're able to make it work with what the market wants.
Cool.
I think, one of the things that we've seen is, you know, with any change, right, there's always education kind of goes hand in hand. I'm just a huge believer in education. And I think it takes, you know, we were talking earlier about fear. It's like education can kind of come behind that. And it really helps shore people up to be able to tackle a lot of different things. And I think when Danya was talking earlier, I was thinking too, like at a previous job, one of the things that we really focused on, and we actually even look for this in hiring, is people that, you know, people's ability to learn. So that whole thing around, you know, that openness to learning and that kind of idea that you're like constantly learning. And when you're in that kind of a mode where you're just constantly learning, constantly open, it just helps you through all of this stuff, whether it's transformation, whether it's like, what do I do in a pandemic? Well, I got to learn a whole new set of skills, because guess what? I can't go and see the doctor face to face anymore. I have to figure out, how do I have that conversation? So it's not just operating the software, but it's also the soft skills of how do I influence, how do I build relationships, how do I do all of that stuff now in a virtual world. And you know, and for people that are like mid-career or late career, you know, they can feel even more intimidated by some of those things. But the ones that, you know, regardless of where they are, that have that openness and ability to learn, it just really, really helps, I think.
Awesome.
Okay, now my mic is working. I want to follow up on that soft skills comment. And I participated in a program that ran 8 weeks pretty recently. And one of the comments that a participant made was, hey, I'm usually shy. I usually, you know, if had this been in person, I would have never spoken up. I would have never participated or done all the things I did. And so part of me wonders, like, do we need to kind of develop some new frameworks and understanding for soft skills, particularly folks who are in sales and business development and management and things like that? You know, we're in each other's homes, you know, we see people's pets, we see people's kids. And, you know, there are folks like the individual in the program that I was in, who they were able to bring a self to the table that they had not previously been able to bring. And so, you know, what has your experience been with that? And do you see anyone actually kind of leveraging and building frameworks around that?
Joel, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'd love to. I was hired by a CEO once to deal with a senior engineer, and the CEO, who became a good friend, said, you know, he's super smart, but he pisses people off. I had a conversation with him and really liked him. Super likable guy. And he said, look, I provide elegant solutions to complicated problems. I don't care what my emails sound like. But, you know, here's the good news that the outcome was, and I think it was Aubrey that just, you know, forwarded that question, is I have found, you know, I wrote the book Rewired, and Rewired in a nutshell is, if you change your story, you'll change your trajectory. And it's just a fascinating, you know, a story about the subconscious brain and rewiring old storylines that just, you know, they get in your way and you underperform. But emotional intelligence is really an exciting field. And, you know, Travis Bradbury and Gene Greaves, I believe, have put out Emotional Intelligence 2.0. Daniel Goleman was really the guy that laid the groundwork, arguably, in the 80s. But that's a fantastic read. And I've been able to actually take that book as a template. And I have a 12-week program that is absolutely bullet point. But to answer Aubrey's question, I do think that, you know, going back to Colorado Springs, on the other side of that one comment where, hey, I'm going to make huge money, I love COVID, the other side of that conversation was sad, because then you've got other people that are like, I feel completely unplugged. I've lost my top team, at least, you know, face to face. And you know, and people really are missing that dimension of you know, the social component. And so, you know, I always believe there's room for the emotional intelligence conversation. And I think especially for, and I think, you know, Danya put her toe in the pool there, you know, helping people grow in areas that they feel are holding them back, where they're not really bringing their evolved self forward, is always a conversation I want to be a part of. And I think emotional intelligence is a fantastic field when it's done intuitively, with a framework and a blueprint and some really clear desired outcomes and a facilitator. fantastic to get the outcomes I think Aubrey was talking about.
Yeah, Alice, you have a question?
No, hi everybody, it's Carrie. I have
Hi, Carrie.
a comment and a question. So I know that two of our panelists are in the training area, and so what my question is I'm watching my daughter and my son do online schooling, where in some classes they shine, in some classes they don't, and it's a lot of times it's because of the facilitation or the way that the training is being led. So Christine, I loved what you said about the breakout rooms. I think that helps to pull out of people what they usually wouldn't get. But as I think about, you know, my kids and the youth sitting in school right now, I just want to understand or kind of think through different ways and innovative ways that we can really train them. Because I know you're talking about the sense of, you know, in the sense of the adult, but I'm seeing the exact same thing at the younger levels. So just kind of curious, outside of the breakout rooms, what is really, really effective?
I will just add to her question, because I have one child that is doing quite well in the online environment and another one that is crumbling faster than I can try to build them up. And so I know this can expand to the adult world and the business world and everything, but I'm seeing it up close and personal, and I would pass on any information to our school. I'm actually part of their hiring committees and things like that. But I have seen some people really succeed in delivering information in this new format. And I have seen some folks who, I mean, teachers get a lot put on their shoulders, but they are failing miserably.
Mm-hmm. Can I answer that question? I don't want to take away from
Yeah, jump in, yeah.
So I've got two amazing daughters. That's why I feel so at home with all the women on the call. So my older one graduated from Ole Miss, and she lives in Nashville now. She's working for Insight Global, she's crushing it. Great, great, great thing. My younger daughter is a junior at Pepperdine, which is out in Malibu, which is where we were about two and a half months ago. Now we're in North Atlanta. And to the woman, I don't know if it was Ellis who was just speaking, we had almost an identical situation. And you know, of course, we all know, you know, we live now with screenagers, not teenagers. And we joke, but, you know, the ability for the millennials to communicate ideas, even though my younger daughter's by far the smartest one of the four of us. She's brilliant. And so I'm going to answer the question. You know, we had a similar challenge. And what I did was I helped my daughter construct an email, which sounded something like this, you know. I want to let you know, this is what I love about your class. This is what I've noticed about your specific teaching style that I feel like I really connect to. But, you know, if I can be so bold, you know, there are a couple of things that I'm struggling with. And I want to share them with you with the intention of really making this a great experience, because, you know, I've got a vision for my life and I have dreams, and I want to make sure that, you know, I really want to get this right. And so I have just found that a lot of communication, and I've, you know, studied it and taught on it, especially our kids, they really don't know how to communicate ideas socially. And I even push my daughters when they go on dates. Like the first question I asked my daughter was, what was the level of conversation? And I really drill down on it. Like, I know they want to go date some stud, and that's great, but I want to know, like, does this person have the ability to have a conversation with you that touches parts of you emotionally? And you know, are they smart, you know? And so I don't know if this even answers your question, other than to say, I think we've got to teach our kids how to ask appropriately without sounding like they're complaining. They need to put themselves out there. Hey, I'm ambitious. I'm a dreamer. I love what you're trying to do to make the world a better place, but I'm up against a wall here and I have to find a solution. We had my daughter write that email multiple times when she was like on the bubble, like between like an 89 and a 91 for an A. And every time she won the conversation. And it just blew me away that if we're constructive and positive in our speech and we really build up other people, it's amazing how willing people are to hear that there's an issue and they want to, you know, they really want to change that. So I don't know, does that help at all? I don't know if I even touched on what you were asking.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because what you're saying could absolutely apply to the virtual world in business. I mean, if you just come clean with people and give them that and empower them to think about what they're doing, what you're saying is very empowering. So, and guys, I just want to wrap up and say thank you so much for attending, and to remind everyone to donate to the CWOK Scholarship Fund. This helps, speaking of our daughters, I have 2 daughters, by the way, help STEM student or early career women in tech, and help us all, as I say, reach back and grab and bring us up. So I think we're all good. And if anyone doesn't have anything else, we'll go ahead and end the meeting. And I can't say thank you enough to panelists and everyone who attended. This has been so awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great job. Great
Thank you,
job,
guys.
Kristen.